Hey everybody, what's going on? What's hot? What's hip? What's happening? What is shaking on your Friday night? So excited tonight to tell you about the FBI, the TV show. We've got a very special guest star coming on, one of the authors of this great new book, the FBI Dossier. We'll hear all about it. You guys can get your fill. It's going to be awesome. You're going to love it. Rumpled. I'm halfway through episode 14. So good that Mrs. Peck is a Spitfire, says Dupadoo. Must be talking about the Columbo podcast. Scott LaRock says, you deserve better headphones, Tom. I love these headphones. It's a neckband. They're nice. Isn't she, though? Now people are asking what's being suggested there. I don't know. Anyway, Ed Robertson, special programming note. As you can see on the bottom of the screen, no super chats tonight. Don't do it. Instead, I would love it if you went to edrobertson.com and bought a book. Any book. I recommend this one. There's Men of Action, a new one he's got out right now, and plenty of others. In addition to the fact you can go to televisionconfidential.com and you will see all things Ed Robertson there, and it will be awesome. You will love it. Everybody will love it. This guy I hold in the greatest esteem. He's an amazing author. He's a tremendous compendium of television history. He's a broadcaster in his own right, his radio show and podcasts, TV Confidential. Highly worshipped amongst television people. He's had all the biggies on. He's got writers, producers, director, you name it, he's had them. So we are going to be glad to have him. And maybe he'll be able to tell us when he and I first started talking and what's going on with the introduction of this book, which I feel like a fool about. We'll have him on here in just a second. Anyway, let's see. Terry Loves Tech, Bayer Dynamic DT770. I like these. These do fine. These are great. These are Sony. I don't know what the number is on them. I do know Terry loves tech, though. Terry does love tech. And just for the backstory, I know that Ed and I first managed to get him to do some interviews in the 90s. I don't know what date. He will know exactly what date. Let me get Ed up on screen here and welcome him to the show. Here he is, the one, the only Ed Robertson. Ed, how are you?
Tom.
How's it going?
I'm fine. Do I need to turn something off? I'm getting an echo.
Well, if you go to your settings, there'll be an audio setting there.
Okay.
And you can click on the thing, echo noise control or something. It should
Echo
be.
cancellation?
That's it.
All right.
Are we good?
I think we're better.
Well, see, now I'm getting an echo. Let me turn mine off. No, it's okay. I'll fix it.
Okay.
Now we're good. Well, now we're not good.
Live audio, folks.
Yes, it is live audio.
I used to do my show live, and there are a lot of advantages, and there are a lot of advantages, and there are a lot of quirks you got to deal with when you're doing it live. But working out kinks like this is one of them. But
yes.
But I admire you, and because I know this from my end, it's a little easier when you have somebody in the booth next to you who's handling all these kinks in real time, so that you can focus on being the fabulous Tom Gully and presenting the kind of awesome content that you do every day and that you've done for so many years.
Yes. I'll sign off on that. If you had headphones, then we wouldn't have an echo.
Oh.
Yeah.
So if I put this
then we'd
on,
be in business.
If I put this on, would that eliminate that?
Yeah, that'll take care of it.
How's that?
Now we're good.
Okay.
Now you're volume's really low, but
Oh,
let me see here.
if let me see if that solves something. Oh, hang on a second. One Mississippi, two Mississippi.
No, it's the same as before. Your headphones may have a control on them on the that thing there. No, other side.
Other side?
Yeah, there's a thing there. That white bar might.
Okay, let's try this. I'm hearing plus or minus. Is this better?
Put it up to your thing there.
Is this better?
No, it's not. Let me see what I can do here. I can fix you. I can fix you. Now talk.
One Mississippi, two Mississippi.
Just my volume. Huh. Well, just talk away.
These are the sort of things that we try to clean up and work on, and do this in the wonderful world of live radio or live streaming.
It's really okay. Just go back to your settings, take the headphones off, turn off the echo cancellation, and we'll just have a slight echo. It won't be a big deal.
Okay, all right. So go into where's the settings thing? Audio.
Yeah. We'll take this out in post.
Oh, okay, excellent. Okay, all right. So let me. Oh, settings. This settings button.
Yeah.
Okay, audio. Okay. So I should click echo setting. I should click echo cancellation.
Yeah, I think you're good. I think your voice is good now.
Okay. Okay. All right.
There we go. We're beautiful. Everything's perfect now.
You're the host. This is the Tom Gully Show. As long as everything works for you.
Yes. Well, this is appropriate because you told me about your new book, and I immediately launched into my theory of the FBI. And I prefaced it with, I don't know if I've ever told you this theory before. And you very kindly and patiently, and you're always patient with me, you went, yeah, you've told me about that. And then you sent me the book, and I see that there is a huge quote from when? When did I tell you this?
Oh, we had a conversation, I'm guessing. I started this book in the fall of 2016, and not that I'm a slow worker, but I had a couple of other paying projects that came across my desk that I had to focus on in the immediate time, while I was pushing the FBI dossier forward and looking for a home for it and all of that stuff. Thank you very much, Tom Gully. And but I'm going to guess about a year or so into the process. I don't remember how we were, how we came to be talking, but I came to mention what I was doing, and you, as it happens, you not only set up the introduction on my book, you gave me one of my best talking points for the book, which is the FBI is the most successful, longest running television series that nobody seems to remember.
Yeah, it's baffling to me. It was on for 9 years. It was absolutely, it was in that viper's nest of Sunday night shows, probably arguably the most competitive time on network television. And it was there for 9 years, and it was always so solid and so good. And you mention it to people today, and Gunsmoke, Bonanza, the Streets of San Francisco. You can mention all sorts of shows. Nobody remembers the FBI.
And William Reynolds, who played Agent Tom Colby for six, there he is. He's in the striped tie next to Ephraim and Philip Abbott. Bill, who was Bill. it was difficult to find Bill because he was somewhat he was mostly retired and off the grid, but through little pluck and persistence, I was able to find one of his agents, and she put me in touch with him, and he was living in Central California at the time I connected. But anyway, we had several long conversations, and in one of them, he figured the device of the show was partly related to the fallout from Watergate and the credibility image that the FBI took following the Watergate hearings and all of that in the summer of 1972. And if you look at the Nielsen rating for the 72-73 season, which was the 8th year that the FBI was on ABC, and the season that immediately followed the Watergate breakout, the week by week numbers were starting to decline. Now, whether that had to do with Watergate per se, or the fact that it was a show in its 8th year, and usually as the longer you on, the numbers start going down anyway. But it was going down, but it was still it was finishing second to Disney that fall, if I remember correctly. But anyway, Bill says you can trace the beginning of the end to the public reaction to Watergate and the beginning of their distrust with the FBI in general.
Well, what do you think is the reason that, everything's binged today? And this is free on Tubi right now. I've been watching the episodes voraciously. Why should people today care about or watch the FBI?
Because people should care about the FBI because it was a throwback to a time in television where there were clearly defined heroes. There were clearly defined. While you would get to know the motivations of the various perpetrators that the FBI investigated from week to week, there was never any question as to whether they were morally right or morally wrong, because you had a narrator at the very beginning of the story that would tell you what happened and why they did what they did, and why Louis Erskine, the Inspector Louis Erskine, the character played by Ephraim Thomas Jr., was on their tail. And so, and that was a device that Quinn Martin had established about 10 years before with his first series as a producer, The Untouchables, and then later on with The New Breed, and most famously with The Fugitive, using a narrator to sort of act as a guide and to remind kind of guide the thoughts of the viewer and clearly define any question as to what the motivations of the characters are.
Yeah, and Quinn Martin, kind of a star. It's kind of like the Irwin Allen movies. The producer himself was almost a character due to the kinds of shows he produced and the way that he produced them.
Very much so. There was a certain style to a Quinn Martin show. In addition to, in some cases, using a narrator, at the beginning of every episode, you would say Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Now, every network television drama is a 4-act. Is broken into 4 acts per se, but by having that Act 1 at the beginning, that was sort of part of the Quinn Martin imprimatur, And also, the only other producer who was doing it at the time was Jack Webb at the end of Dragnet. Whenever Friday and Gannon or Friday and Ben Alexander would bring the perpetrator to justice, you would have the narrator show up at the end of the story saying, on September 17th, so and so was brought to court in front of the Los Angeles Superior Court, and he was sentenced to whatever,
Right.
and he's serving his time, to kind of fill in what happened after the arrest was made. It's sort of a shortcut of the justice system. There was a little bit of that going on at the end of every episode of the FBI, but that was part of Jack Webb's style, and by having a clearly defined epilogue, which you knew was the epilogue because it showed up at the end of the episode epilogue, this is what wraps up that story.
Yeah.
And a lot of the devices of dramatic television that we sort of take for granted today were, made popular and in some cases implemented for the first time through Quinn Martin. There were not anti-heroes per se on the FBI. But you would have, like, for example, let's say let's say the villain of the week is Eric Braeden. Eric Braeden from The Young and the Restless.
Victor.
And you would begin the episode, and whether Eric Braeden was playing a Cold War spy, or whether he was playing a man who, through circumstances not entirely of his own doing, finds himself at a desperation, pulling off a daring heist because he's facing financial ruin, and this is his only way out of ruin. So, in a typical episode of the FBI, Eric Braeden would have the bulk of the first act to himself. So you would understand what he was doing and why he was doing it, even though the narrator, Marvin Miller, clearly said this man just ripped off the United States Treasury of $17,000 or whatever the figure was. But we would see what he did, and we would understand why he did it, while also knowing that he did wrong. And so when Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. arrests him at the end of the episode, we don't hold that against Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. because he was doing his job.
Well, and there are lots of sympathetic characters on, even the villains on the FBI. There was a James Ferrantino episode where he was a guy that had been bad, but he was caught in the middle of some stuff. He's working with the FBI. Is he going to do what they want him to? Is he not going to do what they want him to? I can't remember the name of the actor that plays the elderly man that robs famous movie actor. But anyway, he plays like a grandfather, and he lives with his grandson and the mother, and he gets involved in something. And he gets his little band of ne'er-do-well thieves, and they're going to do something. And he's sympathetic. He's a criminal,
yes,
but you're sympathetic to him. By the way, Rumpled Trenchcoat, who has a great podcast here on YouTube called a Columbo Podcast, apparently has purchased Men of Action. Doopadoo says, wait, hold on. Where is it? Oh, yeah. I don't care if there it is. Men of Action. I have my own copy here. I have my own copy here as well. Everybody can have one. Doopadoo says, I don't care if Ed Robertson has an echo. I just want to listen. And of course, Police Squad legendarily parodied the acts by having the act name written on the screen while he read a different name out loud. But and tremendous scripts, and it had that Quinn Martin real locations, and night shooting.
Night for night.
Yeah.
Night for night. I believe it was David Jansen who coined the phrase QM in the PM. And that was part of the Quinn Martin style. one of the things that made Quinn Martin stand out from all the other producers of television, particularly when he hit when he first came onto the scene in 1959 with The Untouchables, he brought a sense of motion picture like production qualities to the form of to the limitations of episodic television, because you would have maybe 6 days at most to shoot 65, 70 pages of story, which is not a lot of time. And so what do you do to make it look different? What do you do? What do I do to make my show stand out from everybody else? And so it is less expensive, and it still is less expensive. I don't see much of it today. But back then, because it's more expensive to shoot at night because you got overtime costs and what the unions call golden time. Because if you shoot past 6 o'clock, you get time and a half or triple time, depending on the time of the week or whatever. Quinn Martin didn't care because he knew the look, it would be visually, it would be worth the look. And being an independent in every sense of the word, he would bankroll the cost of his own show. So he would pay a little more money than usual if it meant getting the quality he sought for. In the case of on-screen actors, he would pay a little bit more for a guest star than anybody else if it meant getting a Joseph Weisman, the great character actor Dr. No, who didn't ordinarily do episodic television because he'd rather be working on the stage and so forth and so on. But he would do a Quinn Martin series because Quinn Martin would pay more, and Quinn Martin knew that by paying a little more to get the likes of Joseph Weisman, he would attract other stars from Broadway, like Ruth Roman, like Geraldine Brooks, like Penny Fuller, like so many, and he would attract stars from other walks of life. Nancy Wilson, the great recording artist in the 60s and 70s, who was a very good actress, but she didn't do a lot of acting because she was busy recording and doing nightclubs and concerts and this, that, and the other thing. She did an FBI with Hal Linden in the last. Hal Linden without his mustache.
Oh wow, you don't see that very often.
Yeah, in the 9th season of the FBI, and she played a character. She played a singer whose daughter is kidnapped. And we find out in the course of the episode that the ransom is not it's not money as it ordinarily is, but the kidnapper knows the secret about her past, that if it went public, it would destroy her career. And without giving too much of the episode away, we find out that the character that Nancy Wilson plays is sort of a diva. And even though she loves her daughter and her daughter is kidnapped, she doesn't seem overtly concerned that her daughter is being held hostage. And it's one of the few times when Ephraim Zimbalist loses his patience with the kidnapped victim.
Yeah.
But again, she's not an anti-hero in the way we would normally use that term today, but it sort of blurred the lines between. It was black and white. The FBI was black and white because at the end of the day, Ephraim Zimbalist always got his man or his woman. Mm-hmm. But it was gray in that we understood some of the motivations of the villain, or in the case of the victim, which Nancy Wilson played in this episode, we we ultimately want her daughter to be kidnapped, but we don't necessarily like the diva that Nancy Wilson is playing. So there's a layer of complexity. There's a rich layer of characterization that made the FBI stand out from most other police procedurals back then, and most police procedurals today.
Yeah.
It was also a precursor to shows like CSI, speaking of police procedures,
Yeah.
where now today, I know CSI's been off the air for a while, but at least the original one. But I was thinking along with Marge Helgerberger and William Peterson, because that's the one that really set the form over the last 20 years.
Right.
And so inevitably, in a typical episode of CSI, you would cut to the scene where Marg Helberberger, in her very stylistic reds and her super tight pants and her nicely cropped hairdo, would be going over all the investigation with this, that, and the other thing, and you have all the cool modern music, and it's like a music video.
Yeah.
Well, the FBI highlighted all of the forensic efforts of the FBI lab every week. The lab was very much a character.
Mm-hmm.
And there are often scenes when Erskine and Colby, Evans Jr. and William Reynolds would confer with the various lab people in the course of a show. In some cases, there'd be scenes where they're in the lab, and the lab director or the technician would have their white lab coats, and they say, "Okay, Inspector, this pen you found actually has traces of this person." I don't remember if they called it DNA per se, but they were doing all the things that CSI made famous 40 years later, without the sexy music and without Marg Helberberger.
And without the CGI corpuscles going into a muscle or whatever. I think it's interesting that so many. I saw one the other day where Erskine was blackmailed by an older gentleman, or it was someone he was related to, and he's sweating and going into a little hotel room and asking this guy, "Hey, are we even to leave town? Get out of here, and I won't bust you." But it was that kind of, you broke the law, but I understand why you're doing what you're doing. I recently, and this gets into my question, I recently saw the episode with Robert Duvall, and there are a number of actors who got, I don't want to say their first big break, but it spawned a lot of incredibly, Gene Hackman, and you know the list better than I do, actors who, some of them kind of leaped episodic television to a certain degree. They did a little bit, but they weren't like Dennis Hopper, who did a ton of episodic television. These were people that did maybe a few episodes of something and then went to the movies and never came back.
Duvall did 3 or 4. The one I'm thinking of off the top is one of the first or second year ones. He is a serial. I think he's trying to blackmail the aerospace industry.
Yes.
And he's setting up a bomb off the side of the road.
Yes.
And there's a little girl who says, "What are you doing with this car? With your car, Mister?"
Yes.
And then we find out that he's got marital problems, and again, he's in a situation beyond his means, and the only way he can raise the money is to blackmail the aeronautics industry. Now, Duvall was a good example of. I'm trying to remember whether he was a New York actor per se, or whether he was one of many actors who was discovered by John Conwell, who was the casting director of of Quinn Martin for I'm going to say about 20 years, and he had Quinn's ear, and between his experience working with Quinn and the 10 years experience he had in New York with CBS in the 1950s, he had a good eye for talent, and he was plugged into actors on the East Coast who did not do a lot of episodic television per se, because that would require them to set up camp in LA. And they were New York actors; they were more theatrically stage actors inclined.
Sure.
But I believe Robert Duvall was one of those actors that caught the eye of John Conwell, and John Conwell was also one of the first to change the way guest actors or lead actors were cast. In the studio system, you know this, Tom.
Yeah.
If you had a 7-year contract with Warner Brothers or Fox or Universal,
Paramount,
they would cast you in anything that came along, because we have Tom Gully under contract. We got to put him to use for something, you know?
Yes, and your buddy helped put an end to that, Mr. Garner, quicker than anybody else, I think, probably.
Yeah. But around the end of the 60s, early. Oh, you mean this buddy?
Yes, James Garner. Yes,
Okay,
that guy.
all right.
Yeah,
No, I was trying to figure out what was. No, I understood. By the way, this is how Tom and I first met. We met because of the Rockford Files.
Since you brought it up,
back when this was only known as 30 years of the Rockford Files, or 25 years.
Well, yeah. And by the way, this is me on that very first show that we did together way back in the day. Yeah, no, I'm kidding.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the logo looked familiar, but that didn't quite look like you.
Yeah, well,
but
I mean, you got Robert Duvall, Charles Bronson, Burt Reynolds, Harrison Ford, which would have been very early in his career, James Caan, Jessica Walter, Gene Hackman, David Hedison from 20,000
Voyage,
from the submarine thing.
Voyage to
the
bottom, and also Dark Shadow. But the point is, before we totally lose track of it, is around the time that Quinn Martin was coming into his own as a producer, and around the time that the FBI was leaving its mark on Sunday night television. There was more of the thinking was more, okay, let's look for the right actor to play the character versus trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So you would have in the case of the guy who decides to blackmail the aerospace industry by creating bombs out of the back of his car, that might be a good Robert Duvall role, because I saw him play something like this on 42nd and Broadway.
Right.
But the other difference that the casting people like Quinn Martin were among the first to put into play. Going back to the studio example, if they cast you in one thing, they for as long as you. Tom, if you played a Black Bart heavy type of guy in Colt 45,
yeah,
they would only think of you as bad guy gunslingers, and that was all they would cast you for. When the FBI was one of the first to not kind of diversify its thing in terms of casting. They would cast if they cast Robert Duvall as the unsympathetic character this year, and then there's a script next year that was maybe not a psychopath, but maybe sort of an in between or sidekick, or maybe even the father of a kidnap victim. They would bring Robert Duvall in because John Conwell and Jody McClain and the other casting people at Quinn Martin Productions knew, because they'd seen Duvall or they'd seen James Caan and other types roll on the stage. They know they're capable of playing a whole range of actors.
Right.
And so they didn't pigeonhole actors the way casting people used to do under the studio system. So and so you would see actors appear in multiple episodes of a series, especially if a series ran as long as the FBI did, 8 to 9 years, play different types of characters.
And it was different than Jack Webb, who had his, it seemed to me like, Virginia Clegg and some people, that he had a little repertoire of people that he just kept going to. And some of the coolest stuff about the FBI is those casting against type. It's this guy's always a heavy. Well, now he's the nice guy in this one. He's the one that's trying to convince the criminal to not be a criminal or whatever.
I'll give you a great example of that.
Okay.
Now, there's a character actor named Bill Zuckert. Buckert. Bill Zuckert, or sometimes billed as William Zuckert. 9 times out of 10, he is cast in comedic, semi-comedic roles, often as police captains, police officers.
He's Chief O'Hara on Batman.
Well, he looked like the actor who played Chief O'Hara on Batman.
Oh, okay.
He was not the same actor. He was the Chief O'Hara character on Captain Nice. If you remember that with Bill Daniels. But anyway, Bill Zuckert was a classic comic character actor. But there was one episode of the FBI. I think this was one of Robert Drivis's. Yeah, okay, that's it. That's Bill Zuckert. Yeah. And he later became Columbo's boss in Columbo. Good knowledge, There was an episode where it's not a big role. It's like a one scene day player type of thing. But there was I think Robert Drivis had to report to the mob boss, and Bill Zuckert was cast as the mob boss, and it's a straight dramatic role. And you figure that's not the first Bill Zuckert would not be the first guy I would think of when it came to casting the villain this week. But Jody McClain, John O'Connell, they knew, because they'd seen him do other things, that he was far more capable than playing just a Chief O'Hara type. Right. And if you watch that episode, it works perfectly well. He does what he's asked to do. It works. And it's another example of the sort of innovative, out-of-the-box casting that Quinn Martin shows are known for.
Gotcha. Let's see here. Terry Nee, $10, says Tom's the best.
He is the best.
I'm not. I'm really not. I'm so not. Yes. Well, we all know my failed. CBS tried to get in on the NBC movie thing, and they did the failed Columbo. It's not that good. So, yeah, but there were a ton, and I mean a ton of big stars that got their start in the FBI.
Very much
or
so.
at least began.
Burt Reynolds is another one that pops in my head, and it's this goes back to the thread how we started this conversation, which is shortly after you and I first talked about how the FBI is the most famous show that nobody seems to remember, despite the fact it was on 9 years. It clocked 241 episodes, 240 that aired, one that didn't air. Hopefully, we'll have time to talk about that a little later on in our conversation. But and in a very solid Sunday night performer, the show that ultimately knocked Ed Sullivan off the air. And Ed Sullivan, that was, a lot of people had tried, and the FBI knocked it off the air. But it was at the time you and I talked about this around 2017, 2018. It was still sort of in the gray matter of long-running shows. And then about a year or two later, Quentin Tarantino releases Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is set in the year 1969, which is the height of the FBI's popularity. The FBI started off sort of as a middle of the pack show, number 30-ish type of show. Its first couple of years, it was finishing third in its time slot, but still performing enough. But it wasn't a distant third. It was more like it was still delivering a good enough chunk of the audience for ABC to keep it on.
Especially in that Sunday night was the Super Bowl for broadcast television at the time, and so if you could just hang with Bonanza or whatever was winning, you or Walt Disney, you'd be doing okay. But the interesting thing that I found was that even though that movie took place in 69, if I'm not mistaken, that episode.
Oh yeah. That episode aired in 65. And I remember I was with, I saw that movie at a theater. I think we saw it. I think we saw it at the. We saw it at a theater in Glendale, with my friend Tony Figueroa and his wife Donna Allen, two of my colleagues on TV Confidential, and when the movie ended 2.5 hours later. Donna asked, "What did you think?" And I said, "I loved everything about the movie. I really loved the way he not only elevated the FBI, but made the FBI series sort of a character, a very important character in the movie." I said, "My only hang-up is the episode he dramatized and reenacted by having Leonardo DiCaprio reenact the scenes featuring Burt Reynolds, and portray them in the movie, all of which is wonderful." I said, "My only hang-up is that episode aired in 1965, not 1969. And Donna looked at me and said, "Only you would know that."
Yeah, I get that a lot myself. It's like, "Oh, Robert Middleton. Who are you talking about?" Never mind. It's the guy that knows Terry Towns or something. It's John Dehner's best friend. But yeah, so I'm sure we both get that a lot. But the quality of the writing was so great.
In most cases, this is one of the ups and downs of episodic television, especially back in the era of the FBI, when the typical order for episodes was today for a dramatic series, a network, a typical order for a network dramatic series might be 10, 15. Particularly if they staggered the premiere date and they don't launch the new season in September, they may launch in January, February. So you only need 15 episodes to get you through, that 4-month period. The FBI was producing 30 episodes a year its first 3 years, and so you have to cover 30 episodes a year. You have to write the scripts as quickly as you can and get them ready to shoot, because, as we said before, episodic television is very volume driven, especially in the 60s and 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so, and it's not unusual to sort of run out of ways of getting Erskine. There are only so many ways you can rob a bank. There are only so many ways you can cross interstate lines and commit interstate felonies. There are only so many ways you. I don't want to sound cruel when I say this. There are only so many ways you can kidnap somebody,
Well, and there's only so many ways you can attempt to print your own money. All those other federal crimes, postal irregularities, things of that nature.
But the clever thing about the FBI is after about 4 or 5 years, they would take elements. They would not reshoot. They would not reshoot entire episodes the way Warner Brothers would do in the era of W. Hermanos in 1960, 61. They would take elements of the Burt Reynolds hijacks an army truck episode, and take an element of the Robert Duvall blackmails the aerospace industry, and they might take the subplot of the one where Eric Braeden plays a Cold War spy who's somehow above his head. They would take elements of 2 or 3 shows, they would weave them into entirely different episodes. And so you would take the basic elements, but it would be a different story. And that was one way to keep the episode. That was one way of keeping the story fresh. And the other thing, and I don't know whether they knew this at the time. It's always interesting to look back at these shows and watch them in an accelerated order, as I did when I was working on this book, Tom. But we mentioned that when the show first premiered in 1965, it was hitting a certain percentage of the television viewing audience, but it wasn't capturing all of the television viewing audience. So 4 or 5 years later, when the show really catches on and starts to make and becomes a huge international hit, which is attracting more viewers to the U.S. audience, you may run an episode that has elements of a show that you did 4 years ago, but odds are the viewers who are watching it tonight weren't watching the show 4 years ago, so it's new to them.
Right.
I've talked to a few producers about this, and off the record, they said, "Well, we were hoping. That's what we were banking on."
Exactly. UK horror scene, who's probably interviewed every single major horror actor and director in the last 30 years, says, did the FBI TV show ever reach the UK?
I believe it did. I know it was very popular in France and other European countries at the time. So I'm certain. I'd have to look it up in the book, but I'm certain. I'm certain it did. At its height, it was shown in something like 25 different countries besides the U.S.
Wow.
And so it was very popular around the world. And part of one of the things, this is something you don't see done today. But one of the things they did, they being Quinn Martin Productions, to introduce the series to an international audience,
Yeah.
is they did this most famously in a show with Walter Pidgeon, Telly Savalas, and Robert Dreyfuss, Celeste Holm, called The Executioner. I think Robert Duvall may have been in that episode. I don't know. I'm going off memory here.
Right.
It it was a 2-part episode, which means you have a larger budget, larger production shoot.
Mm-hmm.
It had a very star-laden cast, star-laden for 1966-67 cast. And in an interesting bit of non-typecast casting, Telly Savalas was not the heavy.
Wow.
Walter Pidgeon was the heavy. Now, ordinarily, you would have Telly Savalas as the Don Corleone type, and Walter Pidgeon as the guy that is being manipulated. But that's the other way around. And Walter Pidgeon in this episode, in this 2-parter called The Executioners, was very convincing as this very menacing mob boss, and Telly Savalas was very convincing as this middle management mobster who's finding pressure from Walter Pidgeon, and also finding sort of an early working man's version of Tony Soprano, if you might want to call it. Anyway, that 2-parter was filmed as an episode of the series, and then it was taken out of the broadcast order, re-edited, and released overseas as a movie, to help generate international interest in carrying the FBI as a weekly series in other countries. And that worked very, very well. And by 1968, as I say, it was the FBI was not only beginning to make inroads against Ed Sullivan, but also penetrating other countries. And at its height, it was being seen by somewhere between 30 and 40 million viewers a week in a 3-network universe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, someone here says you look like an actor. They're trying to think of who, and they've come up with a younger Bruce Dern.
It's because I need a haircut.
And, Bruce Dern was a looker.
Thank you very much, Dupa Dupa Doo.
Well, and
I will take Bruce Dern.
A lot of TV series did that, and then also when the made-for-TV movies started coming out, many of those were just sent over to Europe, and they were theatrical releases. I think Brian's Song, Duel, some of your better made-for-TV
Mr.
movies.
Jericho with Patrick McNee and Connie Stevens. That was another one.
Yeah.
But so people should. I believe it's worth reading about the FBI. It was certainly worth writing about the FBI because as we've been talking about in the course of our conversation, Tom, a lot of the a lot of the things of the dramatic television landscape that we take for granted today first came into being as a result of the FBI. Certainly, it was there was a time when the FBI and Dragnet 67 ran at the same time, but when it came to police procedurals, the FBI was the granddaddy of police procedurals. At a time when the predominant genre of television was variety shows and westerns.
Yes. Well, and also it was at a time when the FBI was unimpeachable.
Yeah.
FBI was the gold standard of law enforcement. They were all clean cut. They were all, relentless. They were all virtuous. They never made mistakes. In those rare cases when they did, they admitted it immediately. They followed the rules, even though the criminals wouldn't. It was that kind of a show. They would actually discuss that. We can do this, but we can't do that.
Yeah. And again, we investigate. We don't prosecute.
Right.
We'll arrest people when we have when we have the evidence. We don't suspect people. But if a person of interest comes across, the wire, we will look into that as part of our investigation. And
wasn't it Clyde Tolson, who I think his name was Clyde, J. Edgar Hoover's right-hand man, no pun intended.
Yes.
That said, this is too violent. The first episode was the girls being strangled with their own hair.
Yes.
And he actually said this show is too violent. And the FBI, they would shoot people.
They would shoot. They would have. They always had. They always had a designated special agent on the set, whether they're shooting on the soundstage at Warner Brothers, Tom, or whether they were shooting on location in Glendale or Burbank or Toluca Lake or Hollywood and Vine. They would have the one Dick. I'm blanking on his last name. This is live radio, folks. You have mind farts on the air. But there was always one designated FBI special agent whose job was he was the technical advisor on the series, and it was everything from little things to how you hold your gun,
right,
to when you whip your gun out, to how you would conduct yourself in the course of a day-to-day investigation. And that gave the series a measure of authenticity that connected with the viewers. This is another reason why the FBI resonated with viewers at that time, because we had that was the 10 most wanted fugitives list, which was a device that the series started, I think, in the third or fourth year, where at the end of the episode, Ephraim Zimbalist would appear in character as Inspector Erskine and say, okay, if you have found these people or this person, please notify the FBI. We need your help to apprehend these people and keep them on the streets, keep them off the streets, and keep your families and your cities out of danger. So there's an interactive element to the show that predated America's Most Wanted by a good 25 years. And the fact that they incorporated that into the show was a testament to the fact that a lot of eyeballs were watching this show week in and week out. So the FBI knew that the public could be as important to their investigation as any of the lab people or any of the highly trained special agents or inspectors who work the job from week to week to week.
Well, in that credibility that you would get from that, I mean, unless you took the time at the post office back then, you weren't likely to see the most 10 wanted fugitives all in one place. And I believe there is a very famous fugitive that they had right after one of the most shocking events in American history. And I believe didn't they put an alert out for James Earl Ray?
I believe they did. I believe they did, and I believe there was cause and effect between the 10-second spot that that Erskine that Ephraim did that week in 1968. Shortly after that call to action was broadcast, the FBI was able to apprehend James Earl Ray.
Yeah, and it was weird watching it recently. It's like this is a world where the only automobiles are Fords. The new cars are Fords. The old cars are Fords. I haven't seen a VW or a Chevy in this show. What's going on here?
Well, this today we would call this product placement, Tom. This was not quite the era of the single sponsor show, which the highlight of that was the 1950s, where you'd have the Colgate Comedy Hour, you'd have the Texaco Star Theater, so you'd have the major corporate sponsor plastered into the title. You didn't have the Ford presents the FBI, although in the early episodes, after the opening sequence where you would seg into Bronislaw Copper's iconic da 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 da. Well, in the course of the dud, and then the screen goes to blue and white, and the FBI in the early episodes, and you see this in some of the there's at least two instances of this in the DVD package where they leave the original introduction. The Ford Motor Company presents the FBI. So you've got in the original broadcast, you would have the pronouncement of the major sponsor at the beginning of each episode, and then in the closing titles of each episode, you would have Ephraim as Erskine pulling out in a new 1969 Ford whatever
LTD,
a Ford LTD, and he would descend the stairs of the FBI building, get into his car, drive around the Capitol, drive past the Washington Monument as the closing credits declare, which is another sort of product placement, because so you would have a little 10-second baked in mention of the sponsor at the beginning of the show. You'd have a 30-second baked in advertisement for the newest Ford LDT at the end of the show, and then in between, to the extent it was possible. And you would I believe the guy's name was Tom DiPaolo. He was the designated point person for Ford, who was on call from week to week while the show was in production. To the extent it was possible, the only shows that were dramatized were Ford cars.
Yeah, and they even sometimes, some of the shows, I don't recall if the FBI did this, but sometimes when they showed the static credits in certain shows, there would be the product.
Yeah.
For the Dick Van Dyke Show, it was a detergent.
Oh, yeah. They would do it at the bottom left or bottom right corner.
Yeah. You would see the actual product or the logo. Let's see, Doopadoo. Thank you so much for the $5. Completely unnecessary. Please spend your money at edrobertson.com. But Dupa is so generous. She said, Ed Robertson, who are a few of your favorite writers? I don't know if she means television writers or writers of books like yourself.
Robert B. Parker is one of my favorite mystery writers. And what I love about Robert B. Parker that I carry over to my own line of work is that Robert B. Parker taught me the importance of writing with great economy. Now, you can argue, how can a guy who's talking about a 900-page book, claimed to write with economy. And my answer
Here's
to
how.
that,
Men of action. That's how.
That's right.
It's a mere 275 pages.
Yes, but yeah, that's right. I can write short, but to me, if you're going to write, if you're going to take a deep dive into a program that ran 9 years, that clocked 241 episodes, that featured a host of all these great guest stars who went on to leave their mark in the years, in many ways, the FBI may not have discovered Burt Reynolds, but the FBI made it possible for Burt Reynolds to be discovered because of his appearance on network.
They're all here in the book, folks. Richard Anderson, who only Ed and I know who he is, and then Bruce Dern we got in there. We got Billy D. Williams. We got they're all in here.
They're all in there, Nancy Wilson, who we mentioned earlier, Stephanie Powers, Joan Van Ark, and men. I didn't talk to every living guest star, but I talked to as many as I could, and I was able to. And it's always a challenge when. Especially let's just pick Stephanie. Let's pick Stephanie Powers as an example, not just because I was able to talk to her for this book, but she's my guest this week on TV Confidential.
Yes, I noticed. She's coming back.
That's right. That's right.
I don't get that on this show.
Stephanie Powers was one of those. I mean, she did The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. in the late '60s, and then she went on to do Heart to Heart in the late '70s. But during that 10-year period, for a number of reasons, she was a highly sought after, guest star on episodic television or lead star in movies of the week. So she worked a lot. So if you're fortunate to get a Stephanie Powers to sit down and talk to you for 25 minutes, and you ask her, okay, do you have any memories of the FBI? It is comparable to asking her, do you remember what you had for lunch 45 years ago? Because she was just busy working. And I don't remember what I was doing 45 years ago. I certainly don't remember what I had for lunch 45 years ago. But in many cases, they may not remember the particulars of the episode they appeared in, but they'll remember the people they worked with. Mm-hmm. They'll remember the time they appeared on that show, and so and that will lead to the kind of precious memories that helps make a book like the FBI Dossier, worth thumbing through and worth reading, especially if you love the era of 60s and 70s television, dramatic television, the golden age. Certainly the golden age of Quinn Martin. It was his most successful show in terms of number of years on the air. And a show that thanks. I will give Quentin Tarantino props for this. The fact that he took a show that aired in 1969 and made it look like it aired in a show that aired in 1965 made it look like it premiered in That aside, mm-hmm. He did a wonderful job of capturing the importance of the FBI, not only as a Sunday night viewing tradition for people like you and me,
right?
But why? I believe Al Pacino plays an agent.
Yes.
In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Not Schwartz, Schwartz.
And one of the backstories in the first hour of the film is he got the Asian played by Al Pacino got Rick Dalton, Leo DiCaprio's character, a lead guest star appearance on the FBI, which is a top 20 show back then. That was a good credit to have if you were working. That was a good credit if you're an actor who wanted to be seen. It was a good credit to have if you were a character actor, a working character actor like Virginia Christine, also known as Mrs. The Folgers Coffee Lady. I forget.
Margaret
Mrs.
Hamilton.
This is Margaret Hamilton. Yeah. I'm forgetting the J. Pat O'Malley, Bill Zuckert, who we named.
Yeah. To your point about Quinn Martin going after bigger stars, that Rick Dalton thing, that was a guest role in the FBI, yes, but he brought with him the largesse of having been the bounty hunter and had his own series. So it wasn't just like they got a stock, nothing against a working character actor, but they got a guy who had his own hit series.
That's right. And they knew that because he had a hit series or she had a hit series, their audience would likely tune in to watch them that week, and there may very well be some carryover effect the following week in terms of so it was. But the general point was whether you were a star like Rick Dalton, Burt Reynolds, or a working actor like Robert Hogan, who was also immortalized in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It was a good credit to have. It was comparable to being featured on Gunsmoke.
Yeah.
It was a top 20 show in its prime, and it reached a lot of eyeballs. And
someone's asking here if you have a favorite FBI episode out of the 241.
Oh, that's a good one. I have I like the one with there are a lot of there's an episode. It's a first-year episode with Ed Asner and Wayne Rogers and Kurt Russell, where it's a kidnap story, which is one of the 4 types of episodes that the FBI tended to do, and Lou Ayres played the father of the kidnapped victim. He's not quite as obnoxious as Shirley as Nancy Wilson was, but he's a business magnate. He's used to calling his own shots, and he's having a little hard time being on the sidelines and letting Erskine do his job. Erskine doesn't lose his patience with him, but anyway, Robert Ed Asner and Wayne Rogers play the 2 kidnappers. Now, back in the day, this is pre-Lou Grant Ed Asner. Ed Asner would usually in the mid 60s. Ed Asner played a lot of villains.
Yeah,
he would usually play the big, burly, snarly, working blue collar type of
John Wayne movies. He was a villain, for crying out
loud. And Wayne Rogers. This is Wayne Rogers. I think a year or 2 before Cool Hand Luke. He played a lot of different villains, but usually he was like a number 2.
Yeah.
Well, Wayne Rogers is the number 1. Ed Asner is the number 2, and Wayne Rogers is the far more dangerous of the 2 characters. And so I like that show because of the different of the counterintuitive casting in that episode, and because Kurt Russell does not have a lot of dialogue. He plays a frightened 12-year-old kid, but I I was just so impressed at what presence he had as he was either 12 or 13 years old at the time. He dominates that show as much as a kidnapped victim can dominate. He says a lot with very, very little. There's
that Jamie McFeeters or whatever.
Yeah, that was sort of a family western he did for ABC in 63, 64. There's an episode with J.D. Cannon and Anjanette Comer. Anjanette Comer, you look her up. She was a babe in the 60s, but she was in every major dramatic show. And J.D. Cannon plays. He's the villain of the week. He
famous for The Fugitive, and then also McCloud's boss.
McCloud's boss. That's right.
Big line, McCloud. Hey, by the way, I just remembered the actor's name in the one episode I really liked, which was Arthur O'Connell.
Yes, called The Hijackers. It was one of the few attempts. It was one of the few attempts the FBI, the few outright attempts at comedy that the FBI attempted, and
sort of a farce. Yeah.
And the idea was to show that it's not just psychopaths that the FBI goes after. Sometimes they go after, in the course of being assigned a hijacking, sometimes they encounter people who are not professional criminals. And it was an attempt to show a lighter side of the FBI. I think the problem with that episode was not so much that it was the overt sense of humor. I think Arthur O'Connell overplayed it, and maybe an actor who was a little more nuanced comedy might have pulled it off. It's not a bad show,
right?
But
the reason I liked it was the performance of Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., who is kind of the whole time, okay, I know what's really going on here. Don't you think you don't want to do something like that? Kind of a thing. But anyway, hey, by the way, I'm very cognizant of your time. You were wanting to talk about the episode that never aired.
Oh yeah, we could. Well, I believe our first conversation on the air also ran close to 2 hours. So
yes,
we can eat up the clock, as they say in professional sports. But there was a show. One of the first shows filmed was a show called It was called The Hiding Place, and the premise was it's a Japanese American community somewhere in Southern California that is accused of sheltering a well-known Japanese American war criminal, and it was one of the first episodes filmed. It was filmed in the middle of the summer in like Bakersfield, and it was not only hot weather, but they filmed near an airport, which caused a lot of dust and noise and other difficult factors to shoot the show behind the scenes. But one way or another, word of either I don't remember whether an actual copy of the script made its way to a Japanese American activist group, but word of the show made its way to a leading Japanese American group at the time. That whether they read the script or whether it's characterized a certain way, they stated their objection to the show because they were told that it portrayed Japanese Americans in a negative light. Now, remember, this is about 15, 20 years away from World War II. There's still a lot of resentment over the internment camps. And so you have all that, you have a lot of that going on as part of the context as well. If you actually watch the episode, none of those things are in play. Yes, the perpetrator is Japanese American, or the Perpanese is a native is from Japan, but the Japanese American immigrants who live in this small community in Southern California are all portrayed as working, contributing members of society. You have a small businessman running the grocery store. You have you have a small businessman running the local body shop. The law enforcement officials, I believe it's played by Key Luke, one of the great Asian American characters, one of the original Charlie Chan's sons. So it is, there's a plot line where in the very it's sort of the Twilight, it's sort of the FBI meets the Twilight Zone, because there's an element of the story where paranoia creeps in and the townspeople start turning against each other because, well, maybe you're the guy who's hiding out, and maybe you're the guy and maybe it's you, Tom. So
right.
And Ephraim Zimbalist literally gets on a soapbox and basically says, "Calm down. We need to work together. We can't do this. We can't destroy each other."
Right.
And he filmed that at a time when there's great noise. There's an airplane, flying over him, so he's yelling at the top of his lungs in order to do this. That's another story. But the fact is, it was a very positive portrayal of the Japanese American community, and none of those subtleties and nuances came across in the way it was that episode was characterized in this Japanese American group. Well, this group was so influential, they got to the higher ups at the Ford Motor Company, and they said, "If you air this episode, we will organize a nationwide boycott of Ford products." And it took a lot of back and forth. I mean, ABC scheduled the show to air at least 3 times because they figured, okay, eventually it's going to die down.
Mm-hmm.
But to their credit, the lobbyists for this group, they kept at it, and they kept at it, and they kept at it, and they finally got through to an influential person at Ford who said, "If you air this, we will organize a nationwide boycott." And that was enough for Ford to say, "Don't air the show." And they not only convinced ABC to pull it from the broadcast lineup, they pulled it from syndication.
Wow.
So until the Warner Brothers archive released the FBI in its entirety on DVD 10 or 12 years ago, that show had never seen the light of day. I mean, it only existed in the memories of Ephraim Zimbalist and whoever happened to be around when that show was made, and whoever happened to have an archive edition of the November 1965 issue of TV Guide that tells a little bit of the backstory that Tom and I have been talking about. So the fun thing about revisiting the FBI today is, and that particular episode, it gives you an opportunity to judge a show on its own merits. And I believe if most people watch that show today, and are able to judge it on its own merits, they'll recognize that the uproar was much ado about nothing.
Right. Well, I personally think in the time of binging, everybody wants to binge. A book like this is just invaluable because you can watch the episodes, and then each episode you go into some detail about the elements of production, things that might have happened during the broadcast of that episode. Do you find, and I like to recommend TV shows to people, but I almost tell them don't start on the first episode. Start on episode 3 or 4. Sometimes I'll even tell them in a longer series like this, start with season 2. Because there's so much heavy lifting that has to be done. And the show hasn't really found its water level yet, in the very first few episodes. Is that something you encounter when you're...
My colleague, Tony Figueroa, who we mentioned earlier in our program, Tony Figueroa, one of my contributors on TV Confidential, he has a rule of thumb, which is never judge a show by its pilot. If you watch the pilot, you need to watch at least the first 2 or 3 shows before you really judge whether this show is working in general, or whether this show is worth your return investment as a viewer. Because as you just said, Tom, a lot of times the pilot for any show is written and shot and cast and done. The pilot is at its heart a marketing device. It is designed to try to get a sponsor to invest in the show, whether it's the Ford Motor Company or so forth, or to get a network to buy the show and put it on the air that September. And so once a pilot sells and the series and the pilot goes to series, for practical reasons, some of the people who played character A in the pilot may not have been available for when the pilot went to series, and so you may change the casting. Or back in the 60s and 70s in particular, there's a service called I think it's called ASI, which was a screening service where they would get a room full of people from the street, 100 people, 200 people. They'd show a pilot, and back then the chairs had dials, and you would turn the dials at certain points to measure the audience response. These days, I think they will give you. Some people may still do a written questionnaire at the end. They'll probably give you an app, and they say, okay, download the app and fill out the app and let us know what you think of this pilot. And in many cases, while the overall consensus of the screening audience was we like the show, we like the concept, we love Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., we're not so sure about the sidekick, or we're not so sure that we need to see his home life, that sort of thing. And so, right. The networks and the sponsors would take a lot of that data into consideration as they're shaping the first 10 or 12 episodes of the show. And Alan Armour he did not produce the FBI, but I got to know him through The Fugitive. He produced the first 3 seasons of The Fugitive. He once told me it usually takes at least 6 or 7 episodes for any show to find its footing. Now, back in 1965, with very few exceptions, the networks would give you at least 13 weeks to air, right, which means you would have at least 13 shows to find your footing. Mm-hmm. And you would film 13 shows, and then you take a couple of months off, and then and during that couple of months, the the first two shows would air on the network, and between the start of the broadcast season in the network and the time you would go back into production in November, if you got the back nine order, you would have an idea of you would have an idea of the elements of the first 13 shows that worked and the elements that didn't work. And then you would adjust by the time you went back into producing the back nine or the back 17, if you're talking about the FBI, because they're producing 30 shows back then. You would have tweaked the concept enough so that the episodes that aired in the second half of that season may be slightly different than the first half. Now, one of the things that Quinn Martin learned through audience data, audience response, not just people who watched the pilot, but folks who would write in response to the first few episodes, they told Quinn that we, in this case, we understand why you tried to humanize Ephraim Zimbalist by giving him a daughter and having Cecil Kellaway play his uncle from Minnesota, and so forth and so on. But we really want to see, we just want to see Ephraim Zimbalist. We just want to see Ephraim Zimbalist do his job.
Right.
And so Quinn took that to mean that it was less important to see that. It was more important to see the FBI as a force, as a force to be reckoned with. So that when Ephraim made his first appearance on the show, you knew he was just laser focused on whatever investigation he was asked to lead that week. And he didn't have to worry whether the actor who played his sidekick the first couple of years will remember. Stephen Brooks, thank you. We don't have to worry. He can do his job without worrying whether Stephen Brooks is still attracted to Lynn Loring, and so forth. Lynn Loring is the actress that in the photo that Tom is showing you folks. Lynn Loring, I call her the Chuck Cunningham of the FBI. If you remember the first year and a half of Happy Days, Richie had an older brother. Richie and Joni had an older brother. We didn't see him much. He mostly dribbled basketball, yeah. But he'd show up at the dinner table and he'd have maybe one or two lines and he'd bounce the basketball, and that was all we'd see at Chuck. Well, and then after about one or two, for much the same reason we're talking about right now, after about 10 or 12 episodes, they found that there wasn't a lot for Chuck to do. So there really wasn't a need for Chuck, the character. And so Chuck disappeared. And we never heard from Chuck again. And as far as we know, Richie never had
an older brother. Yeah.
Well, that's much what happened with Lynn Loring's character, Barbara Colby. She, as the show originally began, part of the subplot was she was Erskine's daughter, and she was romantically involved with Stephen Brooks, and that was supposed to add a human family-like element to the weekly investigation. According to Quinn Martin, viewer feedback told him that we don't want to see that, and so Lynn Loring was the immediate casualty of that, and so she disappeared after 4 episodes. The epilogue there was she recovered, and she went on to become one of the first females to run a major motion picture studio.
Oh, she did very well.
She did very, very well for herself.
The other thing was that I don't really want to know that he has a home life. I don't associate that with this character. It's like Joe Friday.
Yeah.
Like, no, you are that law enforcement guy. Your home life is only mentioned anecdotally. And that's true of the other agents. It would be if they were going to go undercover. Didn't you spend some time in college working for the paper? Well, yeah, it's 1 semester, but we might be able to get you in there. It would be very tangential to anything that was going on. And those are the kinds of things that I sort of sopped up with a biscuit. It's like, a personal detail. Wow, that's something interesting, because they don't give those out.
Yeah, and the challenge for Ephraim Zimbalist and for William Reynolds and for Stephen Brooks and any other actor who played who played a special agent on the FBI is, okay, what do you do to make a character who is clearly defined and very limited in terms of what you can do on screen? How do you make him interesting? Now, as Ephraim Zimbalist says in the FBI Dossier, if you've acted long enough and have developed whatever internal tools you have as a performer, you will find there are things you can do to not make the character be boring and robotic, the way Joe Friday was often parodied, on Dragnet, and A and B, because we saw this particularly with Erskine and Colby, Bill Reynolds' character, because Ephraim was Bill's superior officer, but he was not a fresh from the academy special agent. He was experienced, and he had enough experience that he could take over certain parts of the investigation, while Ephraim, especially if Ephraim is undercover, with his Alfred Pennyworth voice and his which he called upon many times in the course of the FBI.
Diamond Jim.
Say again?
I was just referencing the character he played on Maverick.
Oh yeah, Dandy Jim Buckley. Yeah, Dandy Jim Buckley. Yeah. If Ephraim is undercover, Colby would be the one operating, when it came time to apprehend the bad guy. Colby would be the one leading the charge and leading the squad of cars and doing that. Or if it was a job that required someone operating the search via helicopter, 9 times out of 10 you'd see Colby in the helicopter on the squawk box saying, "Okay, Lou, we see his car is on the 134, and that sort of thing." And so he would Erskine would delegate a lot more stuff to Colby than he would to Stephen Brooks or the character that I'm blanking on his name.
The last season guy, the football player,
Shelley Novak. Yeah.
Novak. Yeah.
So it was. But you would see the buddy, not quite buddy in the terms of the Lethal Weapon type of buddy relationship, but you clearly had, 2 guys who worked very closely together, 2 guys who probably spent more time in the same car with each other than they did with their own wives and families. And so you had this sort of understanding of the interrelationship of the law enforcement partner that was between Colby and Erskine. That both Bill Reynolds and Ephraim Zimbalist were able to convey that subtly in the course of reading whatever exposition they had to read from week to week. That gave that they were able to create the human side of the characters, even within the confines of their job is to capture Eric Braeden.
UK Horror Scene asked, I did a creative media course a couple of years ago and wanted to ask if the show always had the same narrative in each episode, or was it different with each season?
I'm guessing I'm guessing narrative in the sense of well, the only okay, there's slightly different in the first season, where the first season was the only season of the 9 where there is not an overriding narrator. And I know the difference between narrator and narrative, but the narrator, when they brought in Marvin Miller as the narrator, this goes back to something we talked about earlier, Tom. When they eliminated, when Quinn eliminated the Lynn Loring character and decided, okay, we don't need to see Ephraim's family. We're just going to see Ephraim do his job from go time.
Right.
And you would the human element was portrayed through the villain of the week, or the quarry of the week, because the quarry was not always a bad guy or a bad woman. It was just as often a male or female who, through circumstances beyond their control, found themselves having to do something wrong. And while we as viewers will understand their motivations for what drove them to embezzle $75,000 off from the Bank of Denver, the narrator, Marvin Miller, would remind us, it's okay. Don't hold it against Erskine when he captures these people at the end of the episode, because that's his job.
Right.
That element was not in the first season because there was no narrator. And so when they shifted away from the Lynn Loring character to more of what we saw in the last 8 seasons during the second half of the first season, it was the narrative in that respect was different. You sort of had to figure out for yourself, even though Arthur O'Connell is a lovable old duff, we know he's doing wrong. Whereas it became more clearly delineated when Quinn hired Marvin Miller to be the narrator, and that changed the overall narrative of the show. I hope that answers your question.
UK horror scene. So
yes.
I have a question here, which is Marvin Miller. Is that Marvin Miller from The Millionaire? And
yes.
If so, well, did he appear as an actor in any of the episodes?
He does not.
Oh,
he does not. He does not. I'm thinking, and I'm going off memory here. I think Stanley Adams, who looked like Marvin Miller and sort of sounded like Marvin Miller. I think Stanley Adams appears in an episode, but Marvin Miller does not appear on screen in any of the episodes.
He was probably so well compensated by James Beresford Tipton that he didn't have to. We know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely. Or plus he did a lot of stuff for I believe he did a lot of voiceover work for Hanna-Barbera.
He did.
And later Filmation. He was one of the busier voice actors. I think he was also the narrator of Fantastic Voyage off the top of my head.
I can do the speech from I've been instructed to bestow you with a gift of $1 million. You may not tell anyone, with the exception of the wife, in the event that you marry.
Yes. So he does not appear on screen. I'm trying to think. There is the only instance I can think of where a narrator of a show appeared on screen as a character. I think Roger Davis, when he was narrating Alias Smith and Jones, I think he played a gunslinger in one of the Peter Duell episodes. And then when he took over for Pete Duell after Pete, committed suicide, the narrator of the show became the co-star of the show. But I think there was at least one episode of Alias Smith and Jones where Roger Davis appeared on camera in an episode he narrated at the beginning of.
Did Waylon Jennings ever appear on Dukes of Hazzard? It seems like he should have.
I think he did. I think he did. I don't think it was a case like what they did with Roy Orbison, where Roy Orbison was written into an episode playing himself. I think he
Right.
got
No, it wasn't that. He would have been Uncle Jesse's long lost something
yeah.
or other. I just always about this time the Duke boys decided to tell Boss Hogg just what shucking corn was all about, or
That's right.
whatever they were doing. And
That's right.
but now the music was all scored, correct, or was some of it library? Because one of the things I liked about Quinn Martin Productions in general, and certainly the FBI, which was a show where if two criminals were talking to each other, there's no real way to communicate that one of them is necessarily suspicious by what they're saying, because they're both trying to keep up an intrigue or whatever. But a look, a little piece of music could very definitely create that, hey, there's something going on here that isn't normal. So was it scored or was it library?
Um, it was a combination of both.
Okay.
There were many instances where Bronislaw Copper, I think I'm pronouncing Copper correctly, Kapr. He was contracted to score the iconic opening theme, but he also, in the first season, he was contracted to do 4 episodes, and so there were 4 original scores that Bronislaw Copper did in the first season, and there are several instances throughout each season where you would have a designated composer who would compose original music for that episode or for 6 episodes that season, that sort of thing. And because television, as we mentioned before, episodic television is volume driven, and also budget conscious, I would not be surprised if episodes that a Bronislaw Copper may have scored for season 1, they may have taken some of the scores or the underscores and folded that into a season 7 or a season 4 episode in post production to keep things under budget. I believe Quinn Martin's music supervisor, John Elizalde, who I think is no longer with us, but he certainly did this with most of Quinn's other shows, like The Fugitive, which we've been talking about several times. So he, in the cases of episodes that did not feature original composition, John Elizalde would have, or the people in the editing department would know there are certain music cues that we can use to convey this or that, or if it's a kidnapping story, that sort of thing. But one of the things that kept the show fresh, particularly as it morphed from the 60s into the 70s, is you had a lot more contemporary sounding scores. Dwayne Tatro, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He joined the show, I'm guessing around the 5th or 6th year, and he scored many shows the last couple of years using different types of. There was one episode he scored using hangers. I don't remember how he used the hangers, but he used hangers as percussion to create a different sort of sound.
Gotcha.
And that adds to the show. There's an episode with Booker Bradshaw, which also features a Dwayne Tatro score, and I think it's one of the 2 shows featuring Billy D. Williams that has a sort of funkadelic score, which was contemporary with some of the blaxploitation sound of the early 1970s. That was that gave the FBI a contemporary sound, and it kept it fresh and it kept it current.
Right.
You know, it kept it from aging the way a show ordinarily would be susceptible to aging when it's been on 7, 8, 9 years. And so, in addition to, you know, the way they would sort of, you know, shape different types of sparring elements from a certain season one narrative and weaving it into a new show for 5 years later, they, you know, by bringing in different music composers in the course of the show, that added, they would bring their music sensibilities, and that gave the show a sense of that kept the show fresh and current. And around the same time, in 1969, Charles Larson, who was the original producer of the first 4 or 5 years, when he stepped down and left the show, they brought in Philip Saltzman.
Yes.
Who had his own. When you, a lot of times when you bring in a new producer, that producer, particularly back in the day, the FBI was one in the era of television. The FBI was on. It was mostly freelance driven. You would have a few staff writers, but a lot of times they would bring in Tom Gully, you know, or if Tom Gully was hired as the producer, he would bring in Ed Robertson to pitch story ideas, because Tom had worked with Ed on Tom Gully, Private Detective, and he knew that Ed could deliver a show quickly and stuff like that. There you go. That's him. That was a show that read many
Sherlock Holmes type thing. We didn't do that for. It's on Dumont. Never mind.
That's right. So Philip Saltzman brought in a new set of writers, and those writers had their own sensibilities. And while they're borrowing elements from previously done shows, they're crafting it into new stories, and that again, that kept the show fresh. And going back to something I believe we talked about earlier in our conversation, Tom, the amazing thing about the FBI is that it with very, very few exceptions, it was Quentin Martin knew how to produce a show in year 9 that kept you on the edge of your seat for 55 minutes as well in year 9 as he did in year 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and you may have seen this. I tell people this, and people under 40, and they don't believe me. There used to be a show before the start of every TV season, and that show was a special, and all it was about was the shows that were going to be on that year on that network. And there's one with Edie Adams, and it's for ABC, and it mentions Ephraim Zimbalist and all those Fords when they're driving around, and the feeling that I got from that, and this, I guess I'm asking your opinion here. ABC was seen as, CBS, NBC. These are monolithic networks from back into radio, and ABC wasn't the ugly stepchild necessarily, but they were the network that was maybe a little younger. I mean, NBC, of course, did have Laugh-In, but ABC had Batman and all sorts of sort of younger. It just seems like they were trying some things, I think of, I don't know that it was on ABC, but the Mod Squad.
The Mod Squad. The Mod Squad was contemporary with the FBI.
That was my point. Is the Mod Squad? The music was very defining of that show, and personally, I think the Mod Squad theme song is one of the best theme songs ever. I mean, I have it when I go running. It's like it's the 60s in 30 seconds or whatever.
Exactly. The theme of the Mod Squad, the opening title sequence
running
of the Mod Squad, like the opening title sequence of the FBI.
Uh-huh.
It put you in the mood. It got you those 60 seconds got you ready to watch that show and immerse yourself in the experience of those characters. That has been lost. That was lost for about a good 10, 15-year period in the early 90s when the networks tried to do the they started borrowing from the Ted Turner playbook, and they wouldn't start the show at 9 o'clock. They started at 9:03 or 9:05 or 9:07. And because they were not starting at the top of the hour, they were starting slightly after they felt, okay, in order to keep the audience from changing channels at 9:03, we got to morph from the end of Cheers to the beginning of Seinfeld. And so you would not have an opening title sequence. You might have a cue, a 10-second musical cue. But instead of an opening title sequence per se, you'd just start running in the middle of the episode, and you'd have the opening credits in the background as you're immersing yourself in the story. That got lost for about 10, 15 years. I would say the era of HBO, the shows like The Sopranos, shows like Sex and the City, which also had a fully conceived opening title sequence. We started to see more and more title sequences per se in the last 15 years. And to me, that's good.
I do it on my podcast. I always just used to love it. The most understated, and then sometimes they would announce the name of the actor. He would say, "Hi, this is Howard Duff," or whoever it was. Here's a few exciting scenes from this week's episode of, NYPD.
Felony. Howard Duff was Felony Squad.
Felony Squad. Okay.
Jack Warden and Robert Hooks was NYPD.
But they just would. It would be the most understated, almost like they're not even awake. Here's a few exciting scenes from this week's episode of Alias Smith and Johnny. That wasn't one of the shows, but there was a lot of shows that did that. And then you just saw brief clip. And for the rest of the show, you're like, where's the part where he's going to yell at the guy? Because they just showed me a little of it. And I don't know, from a viewing standpoint, it's a little bit of a spoiler. When you do a 2-hour podcast, sometimes it's best to give them a little bit of the gravy, up front.
Absolutely.
Sit and listen to it. But I always love that when they would do that. It's just
that was part of the package of watching certainly hour-long episodic television in the 60s, 70s, continuing into the 80s. I don't remember, you'll correct me. I don't remember scenes from next week's episode for a typical 30-minute sitcom. I don't remember Barbara Eden saying, next on Jeannie.
No.
But for an hour-long show, yes, that was at just before the closing credits or just before the tag. Hi, this is James Garner. Please join us for the next episode of the Rockford Files.
Yeah.
And then you'd see Angel pull his latest scam.
Yeah, or I think the Wild Wild West would do that. Here's a few scenes of and then it'd be the music, and just that theme would run through.
Yeah,
and it would just be nothing but quick cuts of.
No, you would cut it in a way to make it as compelling looking as possible in 30 seconds.
Yeah,
you would take a scene from one part of the show and juxtapose it against a scene from another side of the show. Whereas if you actually watch the episode, when David Jansen says, I'm not pretending this is who I'm not playing dumb. This is who I really am. I mean, it's a totally different context, but it's fun because it's part of it's part of the getting people to tune in the following week.
Well, and shows all used to do this, but the best one ever is The Fugitive. The best opening of any TV show ever is The Fugitive, because you get a movie in that 60 seconds that's just, okay, I know everything I need to know now. UK horror scene. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say, particularly the first, I prefer the first season opening where it's him and Barry Morse on the train.
Yes.
And William Conrad says fate moves its huge hand, and then you cut to the chaos, and Richard Kimball makes his escape, and you do the quick cuts. I mean, they did, they shortened it.
The glint coming off of the handcuff,
Yeah.
the glint of
Oh no, that was cool. I mean,
Yeah.
And in 1963 dollars, that cost a lot of money, even for a black and white show. To have that effect. But that the gleam of the spotlight, gleaming off of the handcuff, and then morphed into the fugitive.
Yes.
Da, da, da.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's but it's the best. It's got the best voiceover guy. It's just and the proved what Richard Kimball could not disprove. He's guilty. Just the language was so great.
It was
Destination, state prison, death row, or whatever.
There was an elevated form of writing that I think to some degree is lost over. I don't want to paint with a broad swath, but when you and I were coming of age watching episodic television, and again, this is mostly. Actually, the narrative for the first year of The Fugitive was written by Stanford Whitmore, who wrote the pilot and wrote several other shows. By and large, people who wrote for television in the 50s and 70s, they came from other walks of life. A lot of them were novelists, a lot of them were sci-fi writers, a lot of them were Western writers, and a lot of them were World War II veterans.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of life. They had a lot of real life experience that were part of their toolbox that they conveyed in whatever writing they do, particularly when they wrote for television. Not to paint with the broad swath, but because I have friends who are working producers in television,
Mm-hmm.
So they're the exception to the rule. But for the most part, it seems like the vast majority of people who write for television, all they know is watching television or working in television, and so it's very, very insular and not necessary. And I mean, they know their reality of working in television, but it's a little divorced from the real world reality that I think was characteristic of writing in the first 30, 35 years of the medium.
Well, the other thing about it was that they were writers.
Yes.
They wrote books and articles and plays and movie screenplays, and they were just skilled at writing. They would write anything they wanted to, but name Richard Kimball, profession, doctor of medicine. I mean, I'm looking probably it's, I don't know, 30 to 60 seconds worth of copy. Laws are made by men, carried out by men, and men are imperfect. And Richard Kimball ponders his fate as he looks at the world for the last time. And sees only darkness. But in that darkness, it
moves its huge hand. Yes.
It's poetic. It's anthemic.
Yeah.
It gives you something that, well, I gotta know what happens here. And I always tell people, if you've seen the movie The Fugitive, cool. It's a wonderful film. I can't say a bad thing about it. But the notion that series put Richard Kimball in a different place, a different time. And by the way, is Ruta Lee still with us?
She is. She just turned 80. I shouldn't say this on the air.
No.
She's in her 80s and she's doing very well.
Well, that's great. I know you've had her on your show.
I love Ruta Lee.
And isn't she in the episode of, not to get too far afield, but the episode of The Fugitive
with Eileen Heckert, the two-parter?
The nun that he's helping with.
Angels Travel on Lonely Roads.
Yeah. Then I see that should have been released overseas. That is so. I have the box set of The Fugitive, and let me tell you, it is a devotion. to watch every single episode of The Fugitive. But Ruta Lee, in her day, if you ever talk to her again, tell her there's a guy in Dallas that's just va 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 voom. Even as a kid, I was like, "That's a pretty lady, mommy." That's really just an awesome actress too.
Have you had her on her show? Has she been a guest on the Tom Gully program?
No, I think the restraining order doesn't allow me to have her on the show.
If you're able to lift that, let me know. I might be able to.
Okay.
You would love her, and she would love talking to you.
Well, UK horror scene has been very patient. He said,
"Thank you, UK horror scene."
He wanted to ask, with the overall theme of the show back then, would it work today as a remake? And well, I'll let you go ahead.
Well, I probably should have screened an episode of the Dick Wolf FBI series before I sat down and talked to you today, Tom. It's been tried. Mike Connors. This was not related to. I mean, Quinn Martin did not have anything to do with today's FBI. Mike Connors in the early 1980s. I think that still suffered from some of the backlash of Watergate and how the public sort of lost its confidence in the FBI.
Well, you started to see the FBI as a sinister. You never saw that until sort of the mid 70s. And sometimes the FBI would have the crooked agent and stuff.
Exactly.
You never saw before that.
Yeah. But there, Quantico, which ran on ABC for 3 or 4 years, which took place in the academy, the training academy of the FBI, but from a younger perspective. That again, I believe that had a 2 or 3 season run, which in today's day and age, that 3 seasons is considered a successful show because we have shorter seasons, and even if your total number of episodes produced is 40, in a binge watching universe, in a digital platform universe, in a multi-channel universe, there's always going to be a home for content. So, that did well. I think Dick Wolf's FBI is in it's been on for several seasons. So,
right.
Any concept is worth revisiting, depending on the stories you want to tell and depending on the way and depending on the execution of the show, and just as often the timing. Is the audience going to accept a portrayal of the FBI in this way at this time?
Well, I think the dramatic part of the FBI is why I watched it. I mean, the credibility was there when they would go into the lab or they would do ballistics or fingerprinting or any number of other things. I think today's audiences are teched out. I think CSI teched us out. And so for that reason, it could work if the drama is strong enough. A lot of shows it isn't.
And depending on, it may not work on a network level, right? Because the particularly the patience of the network executives is not the same. I mean, we talked about how in its first year, the FBI it was finishing. It would alternate between second and third. Ed Sullivan was number one always. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the FBI would finish second. Sometimes it would finish third. But it had enough of a hole to establish there's an audience for it. The ABC, was able. They saw the potential. They stayed with it. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't happen today. If that wouldn't happen today, which is why there have been many examples of shows that don't that air maybe once or twice, and the overnight numbers are not good enough, and they panic, and they'll put in another they'll air another episode of the Simpsons or Friends or whatever in its place.
I'm still never going to forgive them for canceling Awake.
Oh.
Never going to happen. I'm still upset about that. But I was just about to mention, I don't think it would necessarily work on network, because I think the more dramatic shows are done by the streaming services and the premium cable channels, and I think that's where it would have to be.
I will admit, I don't watch a lot. I certainly don't watch a lot of hour-long network dramas anymore. About a year or so, my girlfriend at the time and I we'd finished watching. We'd finished watching Suits just off the top, and we're looking for a show to try. And there was a show. It was originally a Fox show, and it was I believe it was a contemporary take on it was Satan comes down to earth in modern day New York.
Lucifer,
that's it. Thank you very much. And the pilot was not bad, but as is often the case, by the second or third show, it got a little formulaic for my standards. And while she enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it as much as she did. And it was because I couldn't get past all the familiar trappings of. I mean, you can't just have a modern day Lucifer. You have to have a modern day Lucifer who's a magician, and you have to have a modern day Lucifer who's a magician and who can also host and is a regular guest on the Tom Gully Show.
Yeah,
and you would throw all these kitchen sink things because you feel that the mentality of network audience is you need to have all these sort of things in order to attract the audience, and you have to build to a mini climax every 10 minutes before you go to commercials for 7 minutes, and then you do the same thing. Whereas by and large on cable and digital and streaming platforms, there's a much more layered, more of a novelistic approach to telling a story. And you may repeat the premise. I forget the name of the actor who was the star of You, but I know I believe the 5th season of You just dropped or is about to drop. They established the premise in the pilot. They might establish it again in the first episode, but after the first episode, they pretty much trust the audience's ability to follow the story and so forth. And so, which is not the case with network television. They feel you have to repeat all the kitchen sink stuff.
Well,
and so, if I watch if I watch an hour-long series, very rarely
it's not broadcast. It's all broadcast. USA, things like that, great, but it's definitely not broadcast. The shows that don't have to follow that formula. Lucifer was a really good premise. The actors are actually very good.
Yes,
but it was a messy show. It just was all over the place at all times. And toward the end of it, they're just throwing new characters in left and right and trying to do anything they can. And quite rightfully so, because they're in a tough spot. Yeah. They're in a really tough spot. A lot. And I mean a lot. You mentioned a show, I've never seen it. And I find this all the time with the streaming world that we live in. There are very good shows that have been on 3, 4, 5 years. I just haven't gotten wind of them yet, and
Well,
I'm wanting to.
yeah. I mean, what I'm in between relationships at the moment, but uh, I I discovered a lot of shows in my last relationship because she was a little more attuned to what was going on with the Netflix with contemporary shows, and so um, have you seen you is just one example. She saw the first season, and then she rewatched that with me, and we liked it enough, and we ended up binging the remaining 4. And the premise is it is a sociopath becomes obsessed with this woman he meets in the bookstore that he's working, and he eliminates all the people in this woman's life so that he can be the only one in this woman's world. And
Actually, that sounds like my last relationship. And the next one. Anyway.
Yeah. So that's a thin line to navigate, a thin tightrope to navigate, because even in the era of anti-heroes, you don't want to justify murder, but if in the universe of this character, if the opponents of the protagonist disrupt the protagonist's path, then it justifies his actions.
Right.
Even though at the end of the day, there is some sort of moral equalizer at the end. My favorite conceit about that show, is the character. I'm forgetting the actor's name, but he was one of the stars of Gilmore Girls, and he would from week to week he would decide to stalk the goings on of the woman he's obsessed over this season, and his idea of a disguise is typically to put a blue baseball cap on, and he would tailor like 10 or 12 feet, but he's just wearing the blue baseball cap as if that's the only thing that's going to make him fade in the background, and she's not going to notice him. Right. Now, 9 times out of 10, you'll recognize that's Joe with the blue baseball cap on. We're the only people in the world who notices that, and the lead actress, the object of his desire, blithely is unaware. But if you accept that premise and the show works, and it's a very well put together show.
I have a Roku TV. I have a Google Chromecast. There's a number of things that I stream, and that's fine. If I'm really looking for something, that I don't already know exists and I can't easily access, like the FBI, I still buy the hard copy. I still buy the DVD or the Blu-ray. And that's where I find, like, Longmire. Would have never found it. Saw a box set for sale. Boom, I want it. Fringe. Now, I know these are much older shows, but that's just kind of the way it's going to go. At some point, maybe I'll get Yellowstone, which I have been watching, as they
I hear that's a good show despite Kevin Costner.
It's a really good show.
I'm not a fan of Kevin Costner. I have to get past that in order to watch.
If you're not a fan of his, you might not like it, I guess. But it's a really good show. And so that's how I'm finding them out. The other thing is that YouTube is great at showing you clips of things that are popular. So you'll get a short of something and go, ooh, I think I want to see that. And then it's just a matter of finding it. A show like Ted Lasso is so exclusive to even see. Do I want to buy Apple TV so I can watch Ted Lasso because there's nothing else on there I want to watch? So
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts? Not to interrupt you, but what are your thoughts on the future of physical media, DVDs, Blu-rays in general?
it's very disconcerting to me that I don't think today's kids, they don't see the value in owning that. They're so used to having it stream and it's available on my phone and this and that, and that's cool. I think that should definitely exist. But then there's also another part of me that's like, what if the internet goes down?
Yeah.
Or what if Netflix, like there are movies and TV shows you cannot stream right now.
Because the streaming rights of the platform, Ellery Queen with Jim Hutton
Yes.
is one example that pops into my head. I was talking to Lee Purcell about a year ago, and
that's another one. Creepers.
We were yes, she's a babe.
Well, yeah. What is it? Is it? It's not Fast Times that she's. What's the
Valley Girl?
Valley Girl. That's
Valley
the
Girl.
one.
Valley Girl. We're talking about holiday traditions, and one of my holiday traditions, and it's a little easier to do. I mean, it's a little harder to do when you're with someone because they. You can't count on them sharing your love of the Jim Hutton, Ellery Queen as I do, but I like one of the things I try to do every holiday season, in addition to watching It's a Wonderful Life in black and white, is I enjoy watching the Ellery Queen set on New Year's Eve. Okay. Where it's one of the few shows where Jim Hutton and David Wayne are separated for most of the episode, which is sort of an outlier in and of itself. But it's kind of sappy, and it's got all the New Year's Eve kind of elements to it. So I was talking to Lee Purcell about holiday traditions, and she, I'd never seen that one. Where can I find it? It should be on Amazon. It should be available on DVD. And we looked it up in real time, and Amazon there's no streaming platform. It's out of print, and you can't find it. And that's the problem. Going back to what you said, Tom, about relying totally on streaming services, because like everything else, every quarter they will clear out property. They will clear room from their inventory. They'll let licenses lapse. And so a show that you assume was going to be around forever suddenly isn't around. And the value of, this is not a DVD, but it's a physical work.
Right.
Of owning a physical DVD means it's theirs for to enjoy. This is assuming that you're not just someone who all I need to do is watch the episode the FBI once, and that's it.
There's an episode of Due South that's a Christmas episode. It's called The Gift of the Wheelman. Mm-hmm. As you know, I'm a big Due South person, and if I didn't own that on physical, I want to own. I've got I don't know, probably 500 probably movies, various box sets, whatever, 800 CDs, and I won't get rid of them because I want to own that media. I don't want to pay for it, have it on a drive somewhere that I can access it. What if that company goes out of business? What if? I would just prefer to have it myself. Now, the disposable things that I don't necessarily care to own. I mean, I'd love to own the FBI. It's cumbersome to purchase. Yeah, it's not a box. It's various releases.
Right. Yes, that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
And thankfully, Tubi has it available in two forms. You can watch it individually, or last I checked, which is about 6 months ago, Tubi has a Warner Brothers offshoot channel
Yes.
where you can watch where they basically stream the all 241 episodes in a loop, so you can watch
Yes.
it from any time.
And
So there's
that's great because on Roku and Google Chromecast, there's a bunch of shows that are
yeah.
that way. I mean, a bunch of them. But I just want to physically own my media. Now,
And here's another reason why you want to physically own it, because um, uh, 9 times out of 10, and this is particularly with like Shout Factory releases and Kino Lorber releases, they will include um, uh,
oh yeah,
extra features
oh
that are not
tons.
available in any of the streaming packages. And
Yes,
so,
tons,
that's
tons.
to me, that is also a big selling point to
And
own.
sometimes, like with my episodes of Columbo and McLeod, they will include episodes of another NBC mystery movie
Yes.
At the end of one. They've got extra time, so they'll throw in McMillan and Wife or a Heck Ramsey or something else on there. And that's great too. But my students, when I was teaching in Utah, I started a radio station. It's very remote in the mountains of Utah. There's no paper, there's no radio station, no nothing. And I said, well, we can start one here in the school system, and we can have news and little updates, and we'll have music that the kids today, because I'm always trying to street it up for the kids. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I said, all you got to do is bring me whatever music that you would like, and as long as it doesn't violate any school policies for language, we'll play your music. They didn't have any.
Wow.
They had Spotify and certain other things, but that's not even the download of an MP3 when they pay their 99 cents. They are leasing that basically, and they have access to it. So it streams, but they don't have a physical copy of it.
Wow.
So I'm looking at these kids like, you don't have a CD, an MP3, nothing? You don't own your own media? And that's when I really knew we were in trouble. I'm like, you don't own your own. So if you walk 3 feet outside a Wi-Fi signal, you can't listen to your music.
Here, usually for whatever reason around the holidays, usually the last week of like the week between Christmas and New Year's, which is usually a slow news week anyway. Most years there's usually a story in the entertainment section, or it may originate in the LA Times, and it may be picked up by other newspapers about the viability of physical media.
Mm-hmm.
And there are those I'm sure you have colleagues who feel this way, the way some of my colleagues do. Naysayers, physical media is dead, but my argument to that is not only the extra features element that we mentioned a little bit earlier. 15 years ago, the argument was vinyl is dead. Everything is digital, everything, and CDs are dead.
Right.
But about 15 years ago, I was on staff with an arts and entertainment magazine. I was the senior member in terms of age. I was not the senior member in terms of
rank.
But and it was I was in my mid 40s at the time, and most of the writers and editors were people in their 20s, and so it was a good experience to get plugged into what the younger generation was finding interesting. And we ran a series of articles about the return of vinyl, and I remember having this conversation with one of the editors at the time, who the concept was of vinyl, a physical round disc. that was totally new to him. It's like, this was like new. And I
Uh-huh.
said, no, it's not new. It's been around forever. It's just making a comeback. And this is 5 years after everyone thought it was dead. So that was to me, and it's like a wave. I mean, there are stretches where you'll get the article that runs to the end of the year where the LA Times will say DVDs are dead, but my argument for that is if DVDs were really dead, then Shout Factory and Kino Lorber and some of the other distributors of physical media would no longer be in business. Now they may not be printing 50,000 copies at once.
Right.
They know they'll do it in a way that's cost efficient, but they also continue to do it because they know there is a certain audience and a certain quantifiable number of sales that are out there for them to make. And it's just, and this because you know marketing, as well. It's just a matter of reaching the audience.
And they also don't have much overhead. I mean, other than the rights, to print a DVD costs $1.50, and the case doesn't cost very much. So there's a good profit margin there. I don't mind being a slave to the media companies once.
Yeah.
And that's when I buy it and now it's mine. I don't want to be a slave to a media company for the rest of eternity. Are they going to come down from high atop Mount who gets to watch what and say the thing that I want to see is available? This happens to me with films. It happens with TV shows all the time where it was available, but it's not now. And I think it's Murphy's Romance. Somebody was like, I can't find it anywhere.
Really?
Murphy's Romance, it's just not available. Nobody's got the rights right now or whatever. Or maybe they just didn't want to pay for it. And I'm like, that's odd. No. I have a copy right here on my shelf that's just available whenever I would like it.
Yeah.
And I probably, because I'm one of the people that goes to Walmart and they've got that big barrel that's like $5 and under, and I'm just pulling everything out. That's me. So I probably got it for nothing too. And I also tell people I rarely go to the movie theater. If it's a Tarantino, maybe a James Bond, maybe like a big cultural, like when Top Gun, the Maverick movie came out, fine, once in a while. But I would rather take that money and buy a copy that I'll own forever.
Yeah.
Than do the rest of it. But that's just me. By the way, Rumple Trenchcoat says, "Ooh, Ellery Queen, what a great show." I think you have an association with Ellery Queen to some degree, don't you?
I through my travels with TV Confidential, for sure, I had an opportunity to talk to William Link a few times before he passed. He was also one of my brothers-in-law is a huge Columbo fan, and and when he found out that Bill, when he found he discovered my podcast, a couple of years, and he went through some of the back episodes, and he realized I talked to William Link, and he said, "Do you think if I sent you my copy of his short story collection of the Columbo collection, do you think he would sign it?" And I said, "Let me ask him." And so I called Bill, and Bill invited me over, and he signed the book. We had a nice visit. And as it happened, he had something else to promote a month later, and so he said, "I'll call you. We'll come on your show again." And he did. And in one of his visits on TV Confidential, Bill talked about how dedicated Jim Hutton was when he played Ellery Queen, as in he lived in one of the cottages at Universal, because as you know, Tom, because you've talked to as many actors as I have. It's long shooting film, shooting any sort of thing, television. It's long days. Start early in the morning. uh, and makeup and hair and wardrobe and so forth. You start shooting at 8 o'clock. You may wrap at 6 or 7 unless you have night shoots or exteriors, and so you could have a 14, 15 hour day. And in a
Or
show
it's, it's the last day, and you've got to put 10 pounds of you know what in a 5 pound bag. I mean, you just have to get to the end. You only have the actors for so long, et cetera. So that last day, I mean, can be an 18-hour day easily.
yeah, and so you're shooting it's 6 working days to shoot 1 hour of script. And so if you're and if you happen to live maybe in the valley where it's a good hour drive from the studio, if you're smart like Jim Hutton, you'll say, NBC Universal, can you make available a college for me on the lot so that I don't have to commute back and forth? And that will enhance my performance, because instead of spending 3 hours a day commuting, I can exert that energy on the set and in the character and in the show. And so Bill Link, talked about that. And what a truly dedicated actor Jim Hutton was. And I know that there are some Richard Myers, in his book Murder on the Air, which is one of the great books on television. It's one of the books that inspired me to write about television from a historical behind the scenes perspective. One of the first books about television that came into existence. He thought that Jim Hutton was apathetic when he played Ellery Queen. I'm not sure what show he watched, because I loved the chemistry between him and David Wayne. I loved it when it was on when it was first on in 75, 76. It was there when I rediscovered the show in the 90s when it was on A&E. And when it became available in DVD. That's a show that every now and then, even though I've seen them before, I'll pull it out and I will binge watch. Maybe not the whole show, but there are 5 or 6 that I will go to that are among my favorite shows. And it's the relationship between Ellery and his dad, as played by Jim Hutton and David Wayne. That's what made that show work. And as Bill Link once said, part of that, it was it had 2 things going against it. It was on NBC at a time when NBC was going down. CBS was still number 1, but NBC was going down and ABC was going up. And so NBC all of a sudden found itself in last place. And when you're in last place, you can't afford to stay with the show that's sort of a middle of the road performer.
Right.
And during the first half of this season, Ellery Queen ran opposite Streets of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Streets of San Francisco was still a top 20 show.
Yeah.
They moved it to Sunday nights, where it was opposite Sonny and Cher.
Oh boy.
And it was opposite Sonny and Cher when it was Sonny and Cher post divorce, when people tuned in that first year just for the curiosity factor. Bill Link said if Sonny and Cher had not gotten divorced, NBC would have picked up Ellery Queen because we would have attracted more viewers.
Right.
I don't know whether that's true or not, but that was one of the factors that they weighed in, and that's why the show only ran 1 year. But it was again, it was a show that, forget the trappings, the settings and the portings is fun to watch, but it's you watch that show because you love the rapport between David Wayne and Jim Hutton every week.
Well, Rumpled Trenchcoat says, I loved Ellery Queen, the TV show, how they emulated the part in the books and short stories by having the story end and having Hutton talk directly to the camera to ask us if we know who did it. And I have to say, Ed, Rumpled Trenchcoat, Columbo podcast, does just a wonderful thing. It's a bit akin to what you're doing with the book, and that is takes one episode at a time and just deep dives it on Columbo. And so if you are binging and you're watching along, you can watch the show, much like this, and then get into, location, the Queen of the Southern Mine. I mean, just everything about each episode is right here. And it's fabulous. Anyway, Rumpled Trenchcoat, I know, is very excited to talk, or at least have you on the show, because of your kindred spirits like myself. Of course, I'm never going to write a book, but still, he does very much the same thing. And I think there's people out there that love all that BTS stuff. I don't really know that it exists as much anymore because we get everything all at once, and nothing is a secret and nothing is hidden.
I was talking to my friend Chuck Harder, who is a music and
Mr. Novak guy.
Mr. Novak.
I've had him on the show. He's and there's another show that's hard to see.
Yeah. And only the first season was released.
I know.
I don't know whether they're going to release the second season or not. And Chuck and I were talking. There was a book that came out on a famous comedy team that did not do well. This came out within the last year. It did not do well because the customer reviews, they called the author and they said, there's nothing in this book that you can't find already for free on Wikipedia. And so that is a challenge any writer of a television biography has to face in this day and age. You've got to find a way to present. You've got to find enough material that makes your book stand out from the rest of the crowd, and bring enough stuff that you can't already find for free on the internet to justify the investment you're going to make. And look, if you buy from Amazon, you could probably get it for $35, $40, but that's an investment. And I'm cognizant of that. In putting this book together, I sought to put in material that I know was not findable anywhere else. And I also wrote it with the reader in mind, because you know this, Tom. Mm-hmm. I have a nice collection of books like these myself, and I know
I do too.
I know what
I'm sitting on a stack of them right now.
I know what people like you are looking for.
Yeah.
I know I have a good sense of what will interest you, and I have a good sense of what will likely put you to sleep. And so, I try not to bog myself. I try not to bog my books down in minutia. If I happen to know what some of the budgetary cost is, I might go into that a little bit. But I will say you could read more about this by going here,
right?
Where you can really take a deep dive into.
Well, and if I might, the other thing about what you're doing is almost inherently can't find it anywhere else, because you're doing completely new original interviews with the players involved. Yeah. So you're getting firsthand knowledge and firsthand testimony, if you will, about their thoughts on this subject. It's not necessarily plucked from Variety in 1967. You're talking to these people yourselves, and yeah, you can find it in the book.
Yeah.
That's the place where you can find it.
And if I may pat myself on the shoulder on this one, I was very. This is one of those things where a friend of mine used to say the universe is lined up to help us win. All the things we need to survive and to do what we need to do are there. We just have to recognize them, and we have to find them, and we have to remain open for the opportunities when they come our way. I mentioned a little bit earlier, William Reynolds was a little difficult to find because he was retired and he was as off the grid as you can be. The last interview I found of him was dated about 2007. And he had made appearance I believe he had made an appearance at a Twilight Zone convention, which is a rare appearance because he was living, he was living about 2 hours north of Los Angeles at the time in retirement, and so I was hoping when I first connected with them, I was hoping I would get at least a good half an hour and ask enough questions to trigger his brain and complement what I already knew about Ephraim Zimbalist from my own research. And I don't claim to know Ephraim Zimbalist very well, but I did interview him twice, including once for about an hour on my program, and I got a sense of who he was as a person and how he thought that helped that advanced my viewing of the FBI, and I got a sense of who he was as an actor, and I can recognize some of the things he brought to the table, even within the limitations of that very set character he had to play. Well, that one 30-minute conversation with that first 30-minute conversation with William Reynolds turned into, you want to meet at Arby's or wherever we met, and we had a couple of in-person interviews it was not Arby's. It was a well-known Mexican restaurant chain. The name escapes me at the moment. They should be sponsoring the Tom. They should be sponsoring the Tom.
Somebody should. Yeah, something that you're not really eating. You're renting for a couple hours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Del Taco Bueno, one of
them. The first time we met over lunch, he brought a manila folder of some of his personal memorabilia from the FBI, including some photos, a couple letters of congratulations. He had an article from Broadcasting Magazine, which helped me write the 9th chapter of the book, when we talk about the 9th season.
Mm-hmm.
I knew about this. I knew about the casting change. It was never made clear why Bill was replaced by Shelley Novak in the last season. What I didn't know, and I owe this to Bill Reynolds for this, because he shared this article from Broadcast Magazine. The audience numbers for the FBI dropped considerably in the first month of in the fall of '73, and it had dropped. I mean, it was beating Monty Markham as the new Perry Mason, but it was still finishing far a distant enough second from Walt Disney that ABC gave thought to canceling the show mid-season.
Oh, wow.
That was new information. I would not have learned that were it not for Bill Reynolds.
Gotcha.
and but the fact that Bill became an active participant in the narrative of this book, that is also something that I know you can't find anywhere else because
No.
he didn't give a lot of interviews the last 20 years.
Right. Right. Man, it has been so great talking to you about this. I know we could go on forever and
We
ever and
could.
ever. And I know we're going to have you back at some point to talk about Men of Action, which as excited as I was about this. And of course, I've been showing off this giant quote in the introduction every day on this show.
That's right.
You can't imagine. There's two things. First of all, yeah, right there it is. Men of Action.
Yes.
It's all dog-eared because I read it at night going to sleep. But no, I mean, I would read it and then I would go to sleep.
That's
but,
right.
Just seeing my name in the acknowledgments surround, and I'm not going to go into them here, but you can't imagine my name in the same paragraph as some of these people that I've long admired. And then the length of that quote that I don't even remember saying any of this stuff. I really don't. I'm looking at it and I'm going, it sounds like something I'd say, but I don't doubt that I did say it. But
as I said, this is a bookend.
Yeah.
Just as Bill Reynolds was responsible for helping me shape the conclusion of the book, you helped me. You gave me the angle that, I mean, once I talked to you and we said it before, the most successful, longest running television show that nobody seems to remember, that helped give me the impetus for why to write this book. Because this, I mean, and especially when it comes to finding a publisher who is willing to publish the book. You've got to say, okay, and this is part of the market. This, Tom. It's like, why should I invest? Why should I invest my resources as a publisher,
right,
into publishing this book? And because of what my pal Tom Gully told me.
Well, and they
helped me find the publisher. So
hung up the phone. So. But people can get any of your books, and certainly this one they can purchase through your website, correct?
You can definitely purchase the FBI Dossier through edrobertson.com. You can also find it at amazon.com, where books are sold online. You can also purchase 45 Years of the Rockford Files directly through edrobertson.com. You can also publish Maverick. You can also purchase, if you want an autograph edition, you can purchase it directly through edrobertson.com. You can also find it amazon.com, where books are sold online. Men of Action is only available through amazon.com. But I have links to where you can find it at edrobertson.com. So, edrobertson.com, always a good starting point.
Wherever you make the most money, that's where I want people to buy it from.
Well,
and I say you need to get an autographed edition of any of these books. We had a number of people very interested in your Maverick book and your Rockford Files book. One of our regular listeners had the Jim Rockford Trans Am, same color, the whole 9 yards. When it happened, but yeah, I got mine autographed. See, it's legible.
It is.
So anytime you can get a book with the author's signature, that's classy.
Before I forget, you mentioned the Firebird.
Yeah.
I have a colleague. He owns a vintage 75 Firebird. He was living up in the Bay. We were both living up in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time. And we met for breakfast at Marie Callender's, I think. And he showed up in his vintage Firebird and he said, "You want to sit in it?" And I said, "Sure." It's a lot tinier than on television. It looks huge because it looks huge and badass imposing because Jim Carter was a master behind the wheel,
Yeah.
but it's a lot tinier than I realized.
Oh yeah, yeah, and not that roomy.
No,
You're packed in there. Sure.
and I'm six. I'm either 6'1" or 6'2", but Jim was 6'2", and Jim was a very Jim was a very well Jim Garner, that is,
Yes.
was a, and I say Jim because he let me call him Jim.
Yes.
So
Well, I've
um,
told you my James Garner story, I think.
please share it again with your
Well,
audience.
okay, I was working as a stringer at the Indy 500, and James Garner was going to be driving the pace car that year, and he had walked out to one of it, and it was just a chain link fence, and I
Mhm.
think I want to say turn 3, and a bunch of people descended upon him, and they're asking him questions that it's show business questions. He's got, guys, I'm just here. I'm just here to watch the race. I'm not here for any of that. And then he turned to me, and I was all of very early 20s, very early 20s. And he said, "What can I do for you, young man?" And I said, "I don't want to ask you anything about movies or TV. I would like to ask you some questions about driving." And he turned to the rest of them and said, "Gentlemen, this young man just showed you how it's done. Come with me." And we walked probably about 20 yards down away from these guys. And the first question I asked him, I said, "This is going to seem like a strange question, but older vehicles, vintage vehicles, when I get in them, they have a distinct smell. Like a Chevy, an old Chevy smells different on the inside than an old Ford. And I'm wondering why that is. I just always assume they use, and he got down into the nitty gritty of it and told me the exact answer. I started asking him questions like, when you first started driving, to me, the hardest part of even racing go-karts is the turn. When did you first get that courage to really test your vehicle against it? And he told me all this stuff, and it was a wonderful conversation. I probably talked to him for 15 or 20 minutes, and I said, I've already bothered you too much. I'm sorry to disturb you. Thank you so much. And he said, "I'll see you around."
My favorite chapter in Jim's memoir, The Garner Files, is his chapter on racing. And I am not a car guy.
Right.
Um, I'm a car guy only insofar as I have a great mechanic and I'm smart and I know to bring my Toyota Corolla in twice a year and let my mechanic Jack take care of it. But I love his chapter on racing because it's it's one of those subjects, and you just illustrated it, Tom, where when Jim is passionate, when Jim is passionate about something, and you're able to tap into that, that opens the door for that opens the door for him to talk about other parts of his life or other parts of his career, because it's all in the context of a subject that he is comfortable talking about and passionate about talking about, and you are shrewd enough to know that, and that's how you had that wonderful great experience and that
It had
wonderful story.
nothing to do with shrewdness. Had to do with, I don't ever want to ask a question I think somebody's been asked, and especially people that
That's shrewd.
Well,
That's shrewd. This is the Tom Gully show. He's the Tom Gully show because he's the king of shrewd, folks.
Right. Well, yeah, that's plenty of evidence to the contrary. He was there to drive.
Yeah.
And that was my main motivation, was he's really not here for that. He's here to drive. And I knew he had done the driving, film. And so I figured I'd ask him. And the rest of the time, because see, I was there the whole month of May.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, whenever I would pass him in one of the suites or in Gasoline Alley, he'd give me a quick point or a nod, and it meant the world to me.
Yeah.
It was, and I didn't feel the need that I had to say, "Hey, what's going on?" And that I just gave him a little back, and that was it. It was the greatest. I'm like, Jim Garner just gave me the point. I could live on that forever. I really could. Although Ruta Lee and Lee Purcell, that's also rarefied air. But anyway,
let's see if we can get one or both of them on your program.
Both at the same time
we'll
would be great. Huh? What?
We'll talk off mic.
Yes, we will. We will. But I'm going to let you go. You've already more than been kind enough to spend so much time with us, and then we'll have you back for Men of Action. And I don't know what your schedule's like. If we don't see you before the holidays, then happy holidays. And if we can just suggest to people, please go to edrobertson.com, buy yourself something, buy a friend something, buy an enemy something, and maybe they won't be an enemy for that much longer. And in effect, they are. This new book, the FBI Dossier, will detail how your enemy will be caught and prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
By Ephraim Zimbalist and William Reynolds.
Yes. Thanks again, Ed. I'll let you go. I'll reach out to you on Facebook, and we can do the camera thing in the next couple of days. And everyone also tune in to TV Confidential, which you can get most of the information at televisionconfidential.com.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, televisionconfidential.com. It'll tell you where you can listen to it on the radio. It will also tell you how to listen to our podcast. It's available wherever you find podcasts on all the major platforms. Televisionconfidential.com.
Thanks again, Ed. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Happy holidays to you and to your listeners.
All right. Take it easy.
Yes.
That is the great, the one, the only, often imitated, never duplicated, Ed Robertson. I just think he is the greatest, guys. He is an incredible author. He's very good at explaining all this stuff. He's certainly patient enough to tolerate me, which, that right there is Rumpled Trenchcoat said that's a really great time. It was a really great time. I'm glad you liked it. UK Horror Scene says fantastic. Yeah, get his stuff. And I'm just going to say, if you have time over the holidays or after the holidays, Tubi has all the episodes free. Watch the FBI along with this book, and you're really going to like it if you're a fan of television history, television production, or that era in general. Ed's books really do take you back to a time and place in a modern way. It's not, hey, get off my lawn, but it really will. I think watching shows like this and immersing yourself in them, it helps you appreciate things that you'll watch in the future. So at any rate, that's going to do it for us here this evening. We'll be back on Monday. Our show Monday is on Carl Wallenda. I won't spoil the ending. The old clock on the wall says, like the Reverend Al Green, I'm going to have to get on up out of here. You do not have to go home, but you can't stay here. So as soon as I get the theme music up, here we go. Then we'll close the show. Until I get the theme music up, let's see, UK Horror Scene and others saying good night, have a good time. I had to get rid of this video file at the start of the show because I've got too much stuff on the screen. All right. With all that being said, the only thing left to say is till next time. See you next time.